I want to go around really and get a lot of views. Can't wait to hear what Ray says about this. I know what Lily says about it, but I still want to hear.
Sorry, Anna and I are covering up with a blankie because it's a little colder.
Okay. But I'm just curious to know, are the beats relevant? When rereading them to prepare for today, did you have a new view? Which one of them stands up? And you don't have to mention which ones don't, but what do you think? You want to riff on the beats for a second?
I think that the beats are relevant everywhere, dare I say, where people are reading in English. I loved the performance, the Jane Cortez performance, and the Anne Waldman performance as well. I've read some Kerouac, but I actually also appreciated reading that piece on spontaneity, and I thought about Frank O'Hara, whose work I like too, and his thoughts on spontaneity. And I was scrolling through your website, and I noticed you had a conversation about whether it's possible to write spontaneously or not, which I thought was a great question.
Yeah.
Very difficult question to answer.
Is it?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think any of us think so, but we certainly like thinking about it. Okay, who wants to...
We have a lot more questions in the forums if you want to go there.
No, but I want to go around a little more on reactions to beats generally. Erica Kaufman, when we say beats, what do you think?
I think about Ginsberg.
Why?
And I also think about using the poem as, an activist tool.
Can you say a little more about... Yeah, I mean, one of the ways we get to Waldman is to think about that great collaboration between Ginsberg and Waldman, which produced an alternative university, for one thing. And just the idea of the reading and the performance, they weren't solely responsible for it, but the two of them were kind of programmatically active to make mass readings, political rally readings, and so forth. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think about this decision to make this decision to kind of bring everything into the poem with a certain level of urgency. And also, and I'm thinking specifically about somebody like Anne Waldman, to use the poem as a way to respond to everything that's happening around you all the time.
Yeah.
Like Rogue State's a reaction to Bush. Her newest book, which is fantastic, Trickster Feminism, is response to protests since 2016. So these are ways of grappling with the world around you, and also kind of taking poetry out of the realm of the elite. And I'm also thinking about something that Anne Waldman says that comes from Pound, which is poetry is news that stays news.
Right. Fantastic. Okay, Ray and Amber Rose, what I'm going to do is read you 3 of the items in the list of Kerouac, Belief and Technique for Modern Prose. I'm going to read 3 of them and ask you just to react to any of it, okay? Number 8, write what you want bottomless from bottom of mind. 9, the unspeakable visions of the individual. 10, no time for poetry, but exactly what is. The reason I picked those 3 is that could have been written by an early 20th century modernist. It could be read by it could be promulgated by a conceptualist. It could be promulgated by a performance poet. So it's not just somebody writing on the road. Okay, so Ray first. Write what you want, bottomless from bottom of mind, the unspeakable visions of the individual, and no time for poetry, exactly what is. Does any of that interest you?
Well, all of it interests me, and I, feel some affinity with all of it too, although it's also not very specific, so it's easy to feel an affinity.
What, Kerouac, unspecific? If somebody comes up to you and says, Ray, I really admire your poetry because it makes me think that we shouldn't be just doing poetry, we should be doing what is. In other words, that's Kerouacian for reality is more important than poetry about reality.
Well, I have a slightly different take on it. I'm interested in poetry, in at least in my own writing, that's kind of permeable, that takes account of what's happening around it, of what's happening now. Right. That is about the world and not doesn't start with specifically being about the self, although you really ultimately can't separate the two. And you can interpret what he said in something like that way.
Amber Rose, the unspeakable visions of the individual. Unspeakable is a really interesting word there because it's meant to give. You're giving me an expression. It's meant to. It's meant to give to convey the idea that there are things that we're normally not supposed to talk about, and poetry has always been one of those places where we should avoid doing unspeakable things because, of course, that would challenge language. So much of modern and contemporary poetry is about speaking the unspeakable. Does that appeal to you as a concept?
Yeah, it does appeal to me, and I think what are these three? What does he call them?
The title of it is, well, it's Belief and Technique for Modern Prose, and I believe this was published
Technique.
in the New American Poetry, kind of a major document of 1960.
Okay, yeah. I mean, what that makes me think about is that I think a lot of poetry, and especially modernist poetry for sure, is about trying to find ways to speak things that are unspeakable. And so that for me lends itself to thinking about what the poem can do that the essay can't do, or what the poem can do that the lecture can't do, or that we can't do in other forms, which is to kind of pull apart language or to mess with it, to turn it on its head so that it can kind of expose itself for what it can and cannot say, which I think is sort of related to the first one, which is speaking bottomless from the bottom. That to me just makes me think a lot about surrealism and this idea of like going to an unconscious place that even you might not realize that you can go, but letting those words be bottomless and kind of break open to things that we might not expect them to do.
Yeah. And bottom of mind also implies a hierarchy, that there are things that are of higher minds, higher thoughts, as opposed to bottom. And, you know, Kerouac is hardly alone in modern poetry, modern writing, trying to get us to flip the hierarchy or explore what's supposedly at the bottom. Remove literary, grammatical, and syntactical inhibition. Jason, briefly on that, and then do we have somebody on the phone? We'll go to the forums, 610-616-3208, and we'll go to the forums. Jason, remove literary, grammatical, and syntactical inhibition. You aren't there, but on Monday, Amber Rose, at the end of our graduate seminar, our ModPo grad seminar, went on what I think she would positively, embracingly call a rant.
A performative rant.
A performative rant about, a minute ago she talked about lecture. Did you say lecture? Or
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lecture in the essay.
Yeah. So, you know, I want to extend that to include the rant, the performed rant, which was about university education and what is typically said there, which is not, let's say, typically the unspeakable visions of the individual in a grad seminar. And if we extend it that far, we get to education, institutions, socialization of children, and all those are our favorite topics. So I invite you to associate that, because I can see the way your mind is working, with this idea of Kerouac's, which is not unique, of removing grammatical, syntactical, and literary inhibitions.
Well, we have to think about what an inhibition is. And I'd say that most formal education is about the inhibition of the body at the and somehow splitting the body from the mind.
Wow. Wait a minute. Say that again. Education
Most education
is about splitting the body from the mind.
Splitting
In other
the
words, you
body.
come into a classroom and you're not a body anymore, you're a mind.
right, or the body is contained by the desk or the chair.
Sure. And are you saying that poetry offers a potential remedy to that split?
Certainly the beats are trying to.
Oh, man, what an interesting conception of